afternoon, everyone. And shall I start again? Yeah. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. Really, thanks for the opportunity to present and to be given this opportunity to be here and to meet so many interesting people and to attend so many interesting presentations and to learn so much about soil and health, which I think it's really important. So I'm Katerina Velchova, and at the moment I'm a PhD student in the UK, and my research is focusing on plant microbiome. In particular, I'm looking at microbiome-root-shoot axis and how this can have an effect on overall plant health and development, and how plants are encountering all these huge microbes during their lifetime and how they are from huge importance to their health. So before to go on, I will start with a prayer, and then we will look at my outline and I will tell you more of what I'm going to talk about. So maybe we can start up, yeah. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for today and thank you for bringing us and having us around and keeping us our health and well-being according to your will. I'm asking you to be with us for this talk and to hear your voice and to prepare well for the coming Sabbath, which you have been given to be a sign between us and you. Thank you for everything you're doing for us and be with us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So my outline, first I'm going to talk about what is a microbiome, then we will look at what are different types of microbiome, what in particular is plant microbiome, and why soil health is important and how soil health can be linked to plant diseases and plant health. And then, I'm not an agricultural specialist, I'm mainly a biologist and I'm at the research at the moment, so I don't have much practice, but I can share my humble practice from my garden and what we've been looking at literature and what literature suggests about actual practice, which we can do for using the microbes. And then we'll have some time for questions, but of course, if you have any, please feel free to stop me and I'm happy to take them. So I have one question. Do we have hope in soil? What do you think? So we have so many events going on these days. There are constantly news that the soil is depleting, the soil is under erosion, and it's harder and harder to grow seeds and to grow plants on the soil. And there are so many issues. So it's getting really hard to think that there is something happening in the soil which can help us. But at the same time, we're so much dependent on soil that even our health can be linked to soil health. Now, yeah, there's another question. Can our health depend on the soil? So I guess this is pretty late to ask about it now because we already discussed more or less this question, but can you raise your hand if you think our health is dependent on soil status? So yeah, well, it's the majority of the people, which is great. And now there's another question. So in the mainstream media, we often read that we are made of earth, we're made of stardust, and we're coming from very, very small creatures, and there are lots of things going on there. But the question is, are we made of earth dust or stardust? And what are the people made of? So who do you think we're made of stardust? Maybe you can raise your hand. Stardust. Well, so if you go to the space and different planets have different dust and sort of like soil on different planets, and in the Earth we have kind of the soil grunt. So this is the soil dust and the star dust, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. We are made of dust actually. We're made of soil dust. We are earthly creatures after all, and even that it sounds very fancy to say, well, we are made of stars, like stardust. I'm sure the fact that we are made of the ground and the minerals in the ground have much more importance for us and our well-being. And yeah, that's right. In the Bible, in the Genesis, we read that the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living soul. So that comes to another question. Well, if the soil is that important that God uses it for us to make us and the man to make of the soil, what is it in the soil? I think also across different workshops we discussed that more or less. And overall we can say that there are abiotic and biotic factors. So These are the biotic factors, which are all the living creatures, such as the plants and the insects, and all the living matters which are in the soil, and they have a huge importance of the soil functioning. Then we also have the air, the water, all the minerals, and we discussed, like in the last workshop, the phosphorus, the potassium, all these nitrogen compounds, which have a huge effect on the soil composition and soil functioning. But of course, beside all of that, we also have microbes, which are very important for soil and for soil functioning. And in a minute, we will look more about them. But first, let me introduce about the concept of microbiome. So, have you heard about microbiomes before? And do you have any idea about microbiomes? Okay, that's great. Well, yeah, so just briefly to describe, the microbiome is a collection of all the microbes, such as bacteria, archaea, fungi, and viruses, and their genes that are naturally living on our bodies and inside us, and also in the environment around us. So that is in the soil, the water, the plants, and the animal. And talking about all these microbes, they have a huge importance from our life, the maintenance, and the well-being. So there are different types of microbiome. I think the most common one and most studied at the moment is the human microbiome. It's probably researched for the past few decades, and there's a lot known about the human microbiome, and we will look a little bit about it in a moment. Then we have the animal microbiome. Well, we know sometimes there are even medicines based these days for dogs and cats, which are based on the microbiome functioning for animals, and also other animals. Then we have the soil microbiome, which we will briefly discuss as well. We have the marine microbiome, which is very important for the marine functioning, and we also see there are lots of issues going on in the sea, and most of these issues are also because there are not enough microbes, not enough microbial mass which can tackle the pollution in the oceans and in the seas. And of course we have the plant microbiome, which is going to be the focus of our talk. But before that, if we come slightly back on time, we probably have heard the idea that the health comes from our guts, and the healthy guts means that we also will be in good health. But can we also say today that good health means good soil? And coming back to the human microbiome, so the most abundant area of the human microbiome is the gastrointestinal tract, which are the guts, and there we have a perfectly balanced microsystem, which is composed of thousands of species of bacteria and fungi, and even viruses, and they work in a balance so they can support all the functions within the organism. For comparison, there are 30 trillion cells in our human body, but the microbes are slightly more. There are 39 trillion microbes which are living in our body and primarily in the guts. And that's important to note. In fact, there was one book recently published which was saying that we are about 10% humans and 90% microbes, which sounds striking, really. But I think it's good to acknowledge that because the microbes do have a role in our functioning. And also, the gut microbiome, the human gut microbiome, can have a weight of about 3 pounds, which is about 1.5 kilograms. Which basically it's a whole functioning organ. And this is where the microbiome gut-brain axis is connected with the brain. So if we look at the I think I can have this laser point. All right. So if you look at the human body, so this is the brain, and here we have the guts, and one of the longest nerves probably in the nerve system is connecting the gut with the brain, and then via bidirectional communication, there are signals which are sent between the gut and the brain, and they have an effect on the overall well-being of the human. So, for example, sometimes probably you have noticed if you have a stomach ache, probably you also don't feel well generally within your head as well. And also sometimes if you're very nervous, like I am today, you can probably notice that probably you won't have much of the functioning within your guts, and that will have an effect. And that's pretty normal because they are very much connected. In fact, they're so connected that can be related to various of diseases, including psychological diseases, can have this relationship based on this microbiome gut-brain axis theory. So the gut microbiome, yeah, it's a whole functioning organ, and it's composed of beneficial and not so beneficial bacteria. Usually when we think about bacteria, we think about them as not very helpful creatures, but in fact they can be very helpful. And overall studies are saying that about 7% of the bacteria are thought to be harmful. The rest can be in fact very beneficial for the overall well-being of our systems. So for the microbiome, especially the gut microbiome, the very early known about it was the digestive function, which of course is the absorption of nutrients, and they stimulate the gut motility, so we will have healthy guts. But also in the guts, we have the synthesis of vitamins and enzymes, which can be very important for our functioning. For example, in the gut, we can make, there are bacteria which can make one of the parts for the serotonin, which is, of course, very, very important neurotransmitter. And this can actually be made in the guts more than in the brain, in a way. Also, B12 can be made in the guts, and this important vitamin has a huge role in our overall health. So then it's not surprising that changes in the microbiota environment can induce dysbiosis, and dysbiosis is when we have more bad bacteria than good bacteria in the human body. And then, of course, we can't really function very well. This can happen to diet patterns, environmental chemicals, infections, the overall use of antibiotics, and all of this can interrupt the gut permeability, which can lead to inflammation and even to mental discomfort. In fact, very recent studies have recognized that this sort of dysbiosis and these changes in the gut environment can have a very strong effect on mood swings, can cause anxiety, depression, migraine, and even obesity. And at the moment, there are also lots of products on the market which are looking at how we can tackle all of these issues using microbes rather than standardized medicines. So then we were looking at the GI system. We know that this is the first contact of foreign bodies, such as microbes, and they're all coming with the food intake. They're also coming with drinks and with medicine and antibiotics, which sometimes, yes, we're probably using antibiotics. However, most of the time they're not really used in the right amount, or they're overused, and that can have huge disruption in the human body and the overall functioning. And this can lead to dysbiosis and other diseases, which it's a catch-22 situation, which we generally would try to avoid as scientists and medicals. Yeah. So please remember that for a moment. Now we're going to talk about the plant microbiome. The plant microbiome is very similar to the gut microbiome. It's also very abundant in species. And usually, as we think about roots, they're not just surrounded by soil or just dirt, and the plants are not just made of plant cells. They're more than that in the plant microbiome. And in fact, there is extremely high diversity, microbial diversity, and maybe one of the richest microbial diversity is found within the soil and within the plant systems. So there are more than thousands of species of microbes, which are spread across the plant system, and they're forming relationships which are important for the plant growth, health, stress resilience, as well as improving plant traits. And more, some of the microbial diversities can be classified in these taxonomic classes. These bacteria can be related to the Bacillus family, the Cyanobacteria, the Flavobacteria, also the alpha, beta, and gamma proteobacteria. They are all very different classes, which are very popular for the plant microbiome functioning. Now, how the plant diversity colonizes, how the microbe are colonizing the different plants. Well, for this can happen through different sources. So microbes can colonize the plant vertically through the seeds or the pollen, and horizontally through the soil, the insects, and the air. So when the insects is visiting the plants, they are not just visiting it, but they are also exchanging microbial matter, which can have importance for the overall functioning of the plant. Looking at the soil, this is where the richest microbiome it is in the plant system. And the soil microbiota are mostly horizontally transferred, which also drive their functioning in terms of microorganisms. And Yeah, they're very much dominated by actinobacteria and proteobacteria, which we just previously mentioned. Also the horizontal transfer, so all of these types of transfer are very important for the development of the plant-associated bacteria. Now looking at the spread of the microbial diversity, it goes from top to bottom. So at the top we don't have that much of microbes. We have microbes also in the plant seeds, the plant as a like the petals and just the whole structure of the plant. We have microbes on the stem and the leaves all around, but I think the most interesting and the most exciting area is really that of the root. So this is where the most microbes are, and this is where most of the research on plant microbiome is focused. So yeah, looking at plant bacteria, overall, it is assumed that about 90% of the plant bacteria don't really have that much of a function within the plant well-being. However, some of them, in fact, about 5 to 2% of the plant microbes are known to be the plant growth promoting bacteria, which are particularly known to have influence over the plant growth promotion, the phytohormones production, and also the plant protection against pathogens and pesticides. And here are some examples. So the plant growth promotion can be related to, in the context of nutrition, this can be through nitrogen fixation, cytophore secretion, water utilization. This all can have a relationship over the microbes. So more about them and the phytohormones, which are particularly important for the plant development. These are auxin, cytokine, and gibberellin, which affect the plant growth. They have a direct effect on the plant growth. And also this type of bacteria, they are related to the enzyme secretions. An example is this deaminase, which can reduce the levels of the stress hormone ethylene. For example, the ethylene is usually coming later in the seasons, like in the fall. The plants then have lots of ethylene, and so they can release their leaves. But in this particular case, when we have too much ethylene over other times of the year, then that's not great for the plant because the plant starts dying and essentially we lose the plant. But some research have looked at strains which are producing this deaminase enzyme, and they can reduce the stress level of the plant. So an example are Pseudomonas species, Enterobacter species, Bacillus species, and all of them have reported to have enhanced the plant growth through the production of this enzyme. So looking at the microbes, they can colonize also the inside areas, as we know the microbes are present in the human guts. And these particular bacteria are known as the endophytes, which live inside the plants, and they are very important for the plant system as well. In fact, some research are looking at how we can use these bacteria so they can make special products which can trigger the plant system. But we will look at a little later to see whether it can make sense. So also, these endophytes can have a huge effect over the plant system. And this is a picture which basically describes how, I'm not sure if you can see it well, how essentially it can, as an illustration, so you can see how these little endophytes can enter the plant system, and essentially they can connect the root-shoot axis. So the shoot really is that area, and here are the roots. And this is how the microbe can travel across the plant in similar way the bacteria can do in the human body. So now, looking back at the microbiome gut-brain axis, if there are some issues going on within this human microbiome gut sort of area, we can, at the moment, there are microbiome therapeutics, so in the form of probiotics and prebiotics, which can tackle the issues within the microbiome, but also there are microbiome transfer therapy, which is looking at different ways of how we can transfer good microbiome from healthy organisms to those who are sick. And similar things are going within the plant system. So the microbiome-shoot-root axis is actually very similar to the gut-brain axis in the humans. And this is a way in which plants are communicating. They basically handle the whole communication of the plant system. Also, the plant can also suffer a form of dysbiosis, and if this can happen when the soil or the plant is triggered with antibiotics or synthetic chemicals, they tend to disturb this microbial community in the soil, and essentially they can also disturb the plant functioning, as it can happen in the human microbiome. So yeah, then the overall functioning is disturbed, and that can cause diseases, or even if it doesn't cause a disease directly, it can make the plant to be prone to catch these diseases. So the microbiome-root-shoot axis is the analog of human gut, which was a discovery made by the University of British Columbia, and both of the plants and the animal microbiomes, they rely on very well-designed microbiomes, which can offer enough nutrients, but also can provide defense against pathogens. In fact, if humans have a very good microbiome, they can be less prone to diseases and have very good functioning systems, starting with the immune system, also the nerve system, as we discussed briefly, and the same can apply to plants. So if they have a good microbiome, which can produce all of these different compounds, because of microbes, they can survive longer and they can live better and can give better yield. So both to manage the human microbiome and the plant microbiome, they rely on all these beneficial microbes, so they can tackle the harmful one. And also, it is interesting to note that genetics can also contribute to how this microbiome is being accumulated. This again applies both to human and plants. And sometimes, because of genetic factors, this can affect how the microbiome community is going to be recruited over time, and what can be the overall effect on that for the plant science. But overall, even if we have the genetic as a factor, we still rely, like a huge percentage is very much relied on the overall environmental factors. So the availability of the soil, the type of the soil, and so on. So one very interesting study had been looking at how microbiome communities can boost the lateral roots, which are the additional roots of the root system. And the more microbes are there, the more roots are also there, which means also more nutrients. And in particular, this is because they can produce this plant hormone auxin, which relates to the overall growth of the plant. And this auxin is produced by this by the plant roots, and once being abundantly available, this can boost the lateral root formation, and this also induces cracks, and by these cracks, more bacteria can enter the plant system, and meaning that once we have more bacteria, we have more support for the plant, so more compounds can be composed, and this can be overall good for the plant system. However, it is also interesting that the plant system is sort of smart because it doesn't allow any bacteria to enter the system. They have a very interesting communication pattern by which the plant can make sure that the bacteria is actually the right bacteria the plant will need. So they may enter a sort of like communication saying like, hi, why are you here? And if they say, well, I'm here to help with nitrogen fixation, then the plant will say, welcome. And then the bacteria will have some nitrogen. We also produce some nitrogen for the plant, and there we have a symbiotic relationship. But sometimes the plant may say no, and then bacteria can't really enter the plant. But this is because the plant has recognized that this bacteria may not be helpful for the plant. So yeah, it's also good to have this mechanism as a plant, because if there are too many bacteria which will want to enter the plant, then one theory suggests that this can affect the overall survival of the plant, and if we have too many bacteria, this may not be beneficial for the plant systems. Another very interesting aspect of the plant microbiome community and function is the heavy metal detoxification via the plant microbiome capacity. So nowadays, in many countries, especially in Asia and in Africa, they suffer from soils which have been polluted with compounds like arsenic and cadmium, which can be very, well, not really great for the overall well-being of the species, not just the plant. And scientists at the moment are looking at ways how they can use this bacteria to detoxify the soil within the plant system so the plant can actually grow well. But maybe you're thinking like how the plant actually allows these toxic metals to enter the plant system. So there are mechanisms. For example, the plant usually will need some phosphorus. And they will look for phosphorus, but it's also known that phosphorus as a compound can be similar to arsenic compounds. And then if there's not enough phosphorus, the plant will say, well, there's some arsenic. However, they wouldn't recognize that this is arsenic, but they would take it because they have similar ways of taking up the two chemicals from the soil. And in this way, the plant is sort of hijacked by these heavy metals. And then it may survive for a while because it will think that it has the right transport ions, channels, and all the minerals there, but it may in fact cause the plant to be detoxified. And even if it survives, later on when it comes to be the food of the humans or animals, they can also be kind of poisoned with this heavy metal toxicity issue. And if we look at the plant, what can happen when the plant is being toxified, this usually we will look at how this inhibits the root elongation. Also, it can alter the root architecture, so it may not be very well disturbed. It can have limited productivity of the plant system, not that much yield, for example. There may be no yield at all. And it will reduce the photosynthesis rate, which, as we probably all know, it's very important for plant overall survival. And some methods, such as bioremedication, is a method which suggests how we can tackle these issues using microorganisms, and they can essentially deal with soil pollution and offer ways to phytomedication. So, well, here in a nutshell, we're looking at the plant microbiome importance. So the microbes of the plant can be very important for the plant ecosystem functioning, the plant immune system, the way the plant tackles the abiotic and biotic factors, also the plant development, the plant reproduction capacity, and the plant nutrition. And all of this can be very important for tackling the world challenges of food issues, environmental concerns, overall soil health, and management of the soil health for better culture practices. And not the very last, this is also related to the human health and nutrition. Because looking at our concept, if we have soil which is not rich enough in nutrients, then the plants will not be able to feed well, and then they will depend essentially on the soil production. And then the final consumer, so rather the animals or the humans, will also not have enough nutrition, and they won't really have overall good well-being. So now thinking about it, what are the factors that are triggering the plant microbiome? So there can be many factors. This can, the way the plant microbiome is functioning can be dependent on practices of tilling and ploughing, and also the way the roots are functioning. For example, sometimes the roots of the plant can produce compounds which might be not very helpful or can be very helpful. This can be due to the pH of the soil, also the soil type and the soil structure, also the insects which are visiting the soil and the plant, the going on anthropogenic activity, the natural disasters are also something to consider. If we have flooding or volcano ashes, this obviously will have a tremendous effect on the microbiome capacity and functioning. Also, bird waves can have effect on the plant microbiome, compost, and various of microbial solutions, which we will look at a few of them in a moment. So thinking about tiling and ploughing, overall these are good practices. However, they also have, they're where it's to overturn the soil to allow the old plants to go deep into the soil so they can degrade and to leave some more compounds in the soil. However, if we overdo this can be counterproductive, and this can affect also the microbiome and its capacity as a functioning system. In the science world, there are polar opinions about how often we should do such practices, and in fact, some are very extreme, and they suggest that there should be no tiling or ploughing, because this will affect the microbiome community, and then this may also not give enough production to the system. So yeah, just wanted to mention that. Also, these practices can have an effect on the dry soils, and also can make the soil prone to erosion, which overall we will try to avoid. Another component is the way the farming is being handled. So whether it's a conventional way or the organic way, and which one is more effective for the microbial diversity. So this is a study which has been done a few years ago, and they've been looking at different farming systems. They have about 20 conventional farming systems and then the organic farming system, and we can clearly see that looking at the conventional methods, the diversity of microbiome and microbes is very, very low, which essentially means less soil capacity and soil development overall, plant development. And then looking at the organic farming, we can see that the organic farming have much more diversity. You can see so many types of microbes, which can the capacity to support the plant system and to bring better yield and better well-being and overall functioning of the plant. So we briefly discussed that in the last workshop, the different minerals and their importance for the soil. And yeah, so we know like nitrogen is very important for protein synthesis of the plant. So if we don't have enough nitrogen, we don't have enough plant masses. Then we have phosphorus, which is very important for energy transfer across the plant, potassium, which is very much involved in the carbohydrate metabolism, and calcium, which is very important for the strength of the cell wall. And we have micronutrients, which are also very much important, like zinc, magnesium, sulfur, and iron, copper. And if you think about it, the whole periodic table can be in the soil and still be very important for the overall functioning of the soil and the plant system. But now how all this can come into practice? Well, looking to our garden, I will give some brief suggestions, and some of these are from my experience as a gardener, which is very, very humble. But also looking at the different literatures, some suggest that e-solution can be very helpful for gardening. In particular, this has the potential to replace the commercial chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And it also has popularity for the food industry and also as a medicine, which also suggests that yeast is fairly safe to use in the gardening, so it's not going to bring too much damage. Also, there are various of yeast strains, and each of them can be related to the different agricultural practices, which will depend on the plant. But even that, they're not very well discussed in the agricultural literature from the very scientific aspect, but this suggests that it's still ongoing. So, yeah, overall the use of yeast is suggested to be during the early stages of the plant development because it can enhance the root elongation and the structure. And then you can use yeast when the fruit starts to grow and to develop. So, of course, we don't have to yeast the plant, if we can say it this way. We have to be moderate in that, and most of the literature suggests that we shouldn't use yeast more than twice or 3 times per season. Yeast is particularly good for tomatoes, strawberries, cucumbers, and roses. If you also have some roses in the garden, it's very helpful. Another thing is bird waste as a plant fertilizer. So if you're looking at chickens or hens in your garden and you feed them well with the right grains and you overall tends to keep them in an organic way, this can bring very, very good capacity for your soil. So it is known that the amount of available nitrogen in the granular organic chicken droppings can reach 100% of what is needed for the soil, 70% of phosphorus, 90% of potassium, and many other compounds. And also they have the presence of calcium fertilizer, which can promote the detoxification of the soil. But yeah, as we discussed in the previous workshop, it's very important how these chickens have been fed and whether they've been treated with antibiotics. If they've been treated with antibiotics or any other medicines, this also will have an effect, an impact on their waste. And this is something we have to keep in mind. The same can apply to other manure. If you have cows or goats, it really the same applies to them if you want or you prefer to use this one. And overall, also looking at the Bible principles, when we look at the manure, we also should look for manure which is from clean animals. So we generally try to have manure from clean animals. Another thing we can take from birds is their eggshells, which are very good for potassium, for calcium, sorry, additive to the soil, and also their bones. If you have organic chicken bones, you can also put them in the soil so they can support actually the compost, which we'll discuss in a moment. So another important thing for the microbial community are the importance of rocks. So You know probably already as people who are practicing gardening and farming that compounds like carbonate, calcium carbonate, rock phosphate and potassium and other compounds are very important for the soil development, for the soil functioning. But this is also because this is a food for the bacteria. And when we feed the bacteria well in the soil, they're happy and they can release other chemicals which can help the plant to absorb the different compounds from the soil. So, you know, sometimes there is the situation in agriculture that you have, for example, enough magnesium or calcium, but the plant may not absorb it because, for example, it doesn't have the right channels, the right ions, and these bacteria can help for these channels to open by producing different acids and things which can trigger the plant functioning so they can absorb the actual compounds and essentially live well. So it is important to consider bacteria. Another thing which is good to have as gardeners, it's a good compost. And again, this is related to the gardening principle, the organic principle. Well, usually we try to use clean kitchen waste, organic waste. And then also we can use garden waste. But it's good to have the peels without the wax. So if you have peels with the wax on the top, then you can rather try to remove this wax. This can happen if you boil them, then you will see how the peels will release the wax and you will see a top layer on the top of the boiling pot of wax, which is possible. You can do that. Or yeah, you can just use normal vegetables and fruits without peels, without this wax. So then it's important not to add sick plants or spoilage in your compost because essentially this won't bring any value to your compost and it will spoil as well. It's important to know that the compost should be a dry matter overall, and that's why it's important to have layers of straws or paper or even wood chopsticks, anything which it's sort of dry. So it will be balanced and it's not going to smell, or it will have a nice earthly smell overall. It's important that the microbiome is not going to attract more pesticides and more bacteria, harmful bacteria, which then this may not be of use for your gardening. And well, generally compost takes time. And when I did my first compost, I thought it's going to be done in a few weeks. Well, it took a year, so be patient. Yeah. Well, now I have another question. We are almost at the end of this presentation. What is the perfect soil microbiome? Do you have any idea? Or perfect soil, in a way? Yeah, that's a very good answer. Yes, the perfect microbiome is really in the soil, in the forest. The jungles, the forests, they're probably the areas where you can see the perfect microbiomes. And I don't think this is surprising in any way, because this is the way the creator has made these functioning systems. And if they are not touched by human activity, we can witness there lots of very good bacteria and microbiome functioning. And this is because they are very diverse. You usually won't see only tomatoes or only cucumbers or only one type of tree in a forest. There's a huge diversity in the forests. And I also would suggest that we should have these diversities in our gardens, because when you have different plants and different like flowers, if you plant, for example, tomatoes, we usually also add some basil, which will attract good insects, which will also help for the plants to develop well. You can also plant some flowers in your garden, which will attract more insects, and this will stimulate the pollination and the development of the plant. So really, at the end, we should look for what Creator has done for us, and these are really the forests and the jungles still available on this planet. So finally, I'd like to look at one of the parables, this of the soil, which is mentioned in Luke chapter 8, 4 to 8. And when a great crowd was gathering and people from town after town came to him, he said in a parable, "A sower went out to sow his seeds, and as he sowed, some fell along the path and was trampled underfoot, and the birds of the air devoured it. And some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, it withered away, because it has no moisture. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up with it and cocked. And some fell into good soil and grew and yielded 100-fold. As he said these things, he called out, 'He who has ears to hear, let him hear.' So yeah, I think this was probably one of my favorite parables. It doesn't really give that much of it's the context. Usually it's for how the people are compared to the seeds and how they fall on the ground. But as people who want to work in the garden, I think we can also look at how, well, I think it's obvious that if you leave a seed on the rock, it's not going to grow. And if you don't moisture your plants well enough, they won't grow as well. So yeah, then yeah, some of them fell on the rock, and because of no moisture, they didn't grow. And as the other seeds fell on the good soil and they produced grain, they grew up and increased and yield trifold and sixfold as a hundredfold. So it's important, yeah, to look at how we can have a good soil so we can have all this huge production. And finally, the take-home message really is that microbes are living in complex microbiomes, and their interactions play a huge role in our lives, not only inside us, but also around us and the environment, and just they're literally everywhere. Also, the plant-associated microbes are potentially the key drivers for plant health and well-being, reproduction, and general the ecosystem functioning. If we learn how to utilize microbes in our garden, we can have hope for better agricultural practices. So please don't forget the microbes. And also don't forget to look for God's advice, because in Philippians we read, for chapter 4, verse 6, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And this is really my message at the end. So whatever we do in the garden, we also should look at God's and God, how He can help us and give us advice for good farming practices, so we can have good soil and have a good practices as farmers and gardeners. Well, yeah, that's all really. Thank you very much, and yeah, thanks. Now I'm open for questions. If you have some, I'm happy to answer them. Also, this is my email. If you want to send me an email, you're more than welcome to. So, thank you. Now, yeah, maybe I can close with a word of prayer, and then we can actually look at the questions. Yeah. Shall we stand up? Dear Father in heaven, thank you for today, and thank you for being with us. I'm asking you to guide us and to help us to prepare for your Holy Sabbath day, and to be a good witnesser and testimonial where you have left us to be. Please take care of our travels and our health and well-being, and make us to be good farmers in your advice, and to follow your practices and to listen to your words. I'm asking all of this in Jesus' name I pray, amen. Yeah, so now if there are any questions, yeah, we can go for the questions now. Yeah.
You said that we build our microbiome using the plants and the food that we eat. So the microbes that are on the plants become part of our microbiome. You said that it's probably better to use matter from clean animals.
Sorry? Yeah, from clean animals.
Yeah,
that's essentially the reason, because at the end of the day, the systems are very, very much connected. So if we use unclean manure, then this also will have effect on our food. As we discussed previously, if there are antibiotics in the waste, this can also be absorbed by the plants. And then, in fact, a very huge problem at the moment with these antibiotics in the animal farming is that if you give them too much antibiotics, they become resistant, but they are also not that much utilized by the system itself, and they stay in the meat. So then the consumer will also suffer from this. And yeah, really everything is very much connected. So it's important that we have the right manure, and will be essentially, if not organic, at least fed with the right things. So grains and grass, but not spoilage, for example, because this will have an effect on their waste at the end, and the soil, and then again the whole cycle. Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned yeast solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't really have a very strict recipe. I usually just add a spoon of yeast and then some water, and I dissolve that. And then you can apply it to the roots directly. In the roses, sometimes I apply it directly to the plant, to the leaves. You can also, if you don't want to spray it, you can just pour it down to the roots, which also is good to do that during the night or late in the evening or early in the morning, but not during the day, because this can make like the microbial community not be very well activated, and we really want that. So yeah, but overall there's not really a strict recipe, and it also depends on the plant, I think, sometimes, and how much do you want to feed it with. But overall, it's about a spoon over liter, like a tablespoon, or yeah.
That's dry yeast.
Yeah, that's dry yeast. Yeah, sorry, it's a dry yeast. You can also use beer yeast, actually. Yeah, beer yeast is also okay to use for that, but usually it's a dry yeast for cooking. It's a good one. Yeah.
Is this yeast already contain some microbiome or microbiome?
So yeah,
Or it's just developed inside the soil using those yeast?
you mean if the yeast itself is already active? Yeah. Well, yeah, the yeast itself it's basically type of fungus, and it's in a way it's sort of active, but especially when it comes to dry yeast, it comes activated when it comes to the water. So when they come together, it gets activated, and then it starts functioning in the soil. So yeah, this is one of the microbes which we can use in gardening, which is very good one, I think. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned tilling
Yeah.
and ploughing.
Mm-hmm.
What's the ideal depth of tilling or
Yeah.
plowing, if I can say,
Mm-hmm.
to do it in such a way that we will not destroy the microbiome?
Those are the frequencies.
The frequencies, yeah.
Yeah,
The frequencies, well, it is usually because we will destroy it in one way or another, because good farming practices really have tiling and ploughing about, well, say maybe half meter. It's usually about half meter, so not very deep. But that's done once a year, so not more than that. Like, for example, in the beginning of the season, you can have this done. However, it's better to do it at the end of the season when all the grasses are on the top, and they probably need to go back to the soil. And this is sort of an easy way for them to go back and to be there. So it's better to do that at the end of the season. But if you really insist to do ploughing and tilling, you can do it twice, not more than twice, which it's suggested to be in the beginning of the season and then at the end of the season. Where the beginning of the season means when before actually to plate all the seedings and all the plants in the soil. And at the end is where all the harvest has been gone, so the soil will be clean and will allow for the microbe to develop again over winter and to be probably more stable for the next season as well. And also for composting, sometimes it's also suggested to keep it over the winter season. So if the compost is done by autumn, that's a great time, because you can leave it over winter, and this can help for the microbe to boost the environment and to develop better.
there's this practice lately I've noticed on different farms about no tilling.
Yeah, I also read about it, and I think it's quite impressive because tilling, on one way, it's important because it brings oxygen to the soil, and some microbes, not all of them, do need oxygen to function. But overall, yeah, it is. I still haven't tried that, but I've been looking about it recently, and I thought that probably next season I should give a small batch of no tilling and ploughing and see how it happens. But I think it makes sense in a way. Actually, in England, there is no. Usually, the government doesn't allow you to dig into the soil. You have to make your own very big pots if you want a meter or two, and then you can grow things. If I'm right for that, right? Yeah. So yeah, usually you don't dig into the soil, and one of their arguments really is that they don't want the erosion of the soil to come, but the erosion is also connected to the microbial community. So they usually have normal ground like manure and compost on the top of the soil, and it's not really connected with the actual natural soil that we have in this environment, which in a way it's good, but also not so good, because we also want to be connected to the natural soil, to the natural things in the area. But yeah, overall it's I think it's kind of good to not do that much tilling. I know sometimes when we plant something, we're very tempted to kind of dig around it, especially for trees, which can be all right, but again, not too often and very moderate, like very kind of gentle, not too much tilling really. because of the microbiome communities. Right, well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, it's been wonderful being around, and have a blessed Sabbath. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Send out to be careful when we make our compost. Don't put some disease, some
Yeah.
plant with disease. How can we?
I mean, yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes you may not know that the plant has disease. That's very true. But overall, we will see some spoilage. Like, for example, tomatoes, they may have like yellow leaves. They will generally change colors, and they will look very weak overall. So, which also is difficult to track, because if we collect them at the end of the season, all the plants look dry and pretty much miserable. But if we, for example, see that some of our plants have developed some sort of disease, like the leaf is not growing well or the stem is being disturbed in a way, I mean, of course, you can't have like everything, all the plants being perfect. That doesn't mean that you have to take them away. But just to keep in mind that if you, for example, place plants with dark leaves and like literally burned or taken away by some disease, then this will have an effect on the compost and may not be as good as we would like this to be. So generally, it's good to avoid all the spoilage, like including like spoiled peels from the kitchen waste. If this is like spoilage over there, it has mold, especially if it has mold, I think it's overall good to take this out of our compost.
What if we have some disease plant? What do we do?
Well, disease plant, you mean if we can treat it with microbes, I think that really depends on the plant itself. The moment they're, as far as I'm aware, they're not really, like, for example, probiotics for plants specifically designed for this and that condition. But the research is going on in this direction, and probably we will hear something good soon. But from overall practices, it's just if we can fix it with the mineral supplication and if you remove it, yeah, if you remove. You throw it away. Yeah, you can put it in fire. Yeah, you can put it in fire, or just yeah. If you put it in fire, that's okay, because then there are other processes going on, and then if you use the ashes of this fire, there is nothing to do with the plant disease before. Yeah. So yeah, you can fire it. It's okay. Yeah, I know it's difficult, but you can, if you have your own fireplace, maybe you can put it there. Yeah, but yeah, you can just throw it. Really, it's all right to throw it. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Have you heard something about
Compost
compost yeast?
yeast. Not really. So do you mean to put yeast in the compost? Oh, I see what you mean. Well, yeah, I mean, it would definitely make sense if you go to the forest and take some forest woods or forest plants. But I haven't heard about like people, for example, taking a soil from the forest and bringing it to the comp. Yeah. Okay. Of course.
I haven't tried it, but I know people that they farm.
Yeah.
What they are doing for a living. They bring soil from the forest, put it in their greenhouses. They make their seedlings with that of soil, and they have to put.
Yeah.
The problem is,
Probably. Yeah.
they will follow us.
Mm-hmm.
We have a law, and they passed a law that we are not allowed to take it anymore.
Right.
I know people here that this is what they did.
Yeah.
They took the topsoil, put it in their greenhouses, and he's doing.
Maybe create some, maybe make some microbiome solution.
We can do that actually before. Yeah, this is actually what we're doing in the lab pretty much on an everyday basis. We're testing different microbes and different things how they can, in fact, there is something known as syncoms, which is synthetic community of bacteria, and this comes in a way how, for example, we take samples from the soil, samples from the leaf of the plant, from the root of the plant, and we sequence that. We take a lot of laboratory tests, and then we identify the microbes and which are there, and how this microbe essentially can have overall effect on the plant well-being. So, however, at the moment, with our own like home-based things beside yeast and miniature, and basically in the compost overall, there are microbes going on there anyway. I mean, you don't need to be to work in the lab, so you can make these microbes and then pour it down. Usually comes very natural with the kitchen waste we have, with the miniature. They're all there usually. But now the research really goes in this direction on how different, for example, different microbes can come together and trigger specific diseases of the plant or specific like stress of the plant. There's some interesting things going on with drought, and in countries, especially when the drought is a huge issue for rice and wheat production, they've been trying to use these synthetic communities, so whether they can do some help for the production, but then the other problem is that the microbes are very natural things. So when we try to apply them on large scale, on large areas, this also can bring some issues because they may not be very effective. They're usually effective in small areas, like in small gardens. And because if we have the same microbe over one type of plant, this may disturb the overall diversity of the plant system. So it's quite complicated how we will tackle this with microbes, but we can do that on the individual base at the moment. And to have it on a large scale, I guess we need some more time to see how this will be effective, so it won't affect that much of the overall plant functioning. But another thing which you can do, sometimes people use sands for building. You can introduce that to your soil before to plant the things. Sand, yeah, because sand is very natural in minerals and also microbes, because they're coming usually for the rivers or, well, from the sea. Maybe it's not very recommended because it's very salty, and we generally try to avoid salinity in the soil. Even that we still need some salt, but you can take, for example, some sand from the river if you have a river nearby. That can be helpful because this also can have algae there, which are very important for, again, these microbes which are important for overall functioning of the plant. And yeah, this is something to introduce before you're going to seed the plant. So before to have the actual plant into the ground, this is a way to prepare the soil. So with some sand, for example, because it has many minerals and things which can boost the bacteria solution, because it's not always necessary really to bring bacteria, which also applies to the human body. Sometimes the bacteria is already there, but it's in a form of sleeping stage. And a way to wake up this bacteria really is to give them like the right amount of nutrients or compounds, so they will wake up and start functioning. Yeah, this applies for both the soil and the gut microbiome.
Have you heard of compost that, the little red worms are doing it?
Yeah, this is actually,
Like
yeah.
in the compost, you throw just kitchen waste.
Yeah, this essentially it's a good practice because it speeds up the compost timing. You can have this ready in about 6 months rather than a year, for example. But then you do need to have the specific equipment. Like they usually have a very big pot which is closed and it rotates. Yeah, yeah, and it rotates over time. So yeah, this helps the worms to eat. Well, they're very happy because you give them ready food, and they also then process this food and give you the ready compost, which actually is a good practice, I think. Yeah.
What I would like to ask is it richer in microbiomes than the normal way of doing the compost?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think I don't really know about specific studies which are looking at what are the differences between the worm-based compost and the actual compost. But I would assume that the natural compost probably will be more rich in microbiomes and microbial communities because it is natural itself. But we can do both. We can combine, for example, this worm-based composting with the natural one, and still have very good like timing and availability of compost and solutions. So that would be my suggestion. Yes?
I heard that some plants have on their leaves bacteria that produce B12.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, these are usually the grasses and the algae in the seed. They are essentially on the leaves.
You grow some greens, and some of the greens contain bacteria on the leaves.
So do you mean like any leaf which grows and then?
As a contamination from the soil.
Yeah.
With bacteria.
Oh, as a contamination. Yeah, it is possible. Well, usually I think the misconception that the B12, for example, is made in cows may come from that, because B12 it's primarily made in the grasses and in the soil, and the bacteria there, it also can be made in the human guts in a way, or animal guts, but most of the B12 it's made rather in the sea areas, like where the microalgae are and the algae. All these seaweeds, they produce B12. But the thing for the leaf, yeah, I mean, I haven't heard about a specific example on how this bacteria can function on the leaf itself, because usually it's more closer to the soil itself. But that's a good question, yeah. Mm-hmm. Rainwater. Yeah, rainwater. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is part of the air microbiome in a way, and if you know about the nitrogen cycle, essentially this is how it functions, because the nitrogen itself, it can't really function. It's not active in the air, but becomes active when it reaches the soil, and this happens when it rains. So sometimes that's why it's important to have a normal rain rather than pouring down some water, because the rain from the environment, it's rich in nutrients and other things which can support the plant development. So yeah, it is good. We can try to collect rainwater when we can. If we can do that, that's also great. Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a blessed Sabbath. Yeah. Thank you.